Sometimes fate whispers, not with thunder, but with spilled coffee and a quiet apology. In a room full of power and precision, it took one accident, small, clumsy, and completely human, to stop time. It happened in a blink. The paper cup slipped. A dark stream of coffee arced through the air, splashing against a white shirt. No, not just a shirt, a designer suit, so pristine it looked untouched by the world. Gasps cut through the silence like glass breaking. Elise Quinn stood frozen, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. Her hands trembled as she reached for napkins, murmuring apologies that seemed to dissolve before they reached him. "I didn't mean to. I didn't see you." The man before her didn't flinch, not even a blink. Adrian Vale. CCO visionary, the kind of man whose presence reshaped rooms. At 35, he'd built an empire, not just with intellect, but with the kind of silence that commanded attention. Now coffee dripped down his $1,000 suit, and Elise, on her very first day, had painted herself into the center of a nightmare. He finally spoke, voice smooth as frost. "First day," she nodded, feeling the flush climb her neck. "Yes, sir." "R&D department." "Elise Quinn?" He tilted his head, something flickering behind his eyes. "The Quinn thesis? Tissue regeneration via enzyme redirection from Stanford." Surprise flickered across her face. She straightened almost involuntarily. "You've read it." "I read everything that matters." That was all he said. Then he turned toward the older man standing near the door. "Dr. Keller have." "Miss Quinn, reassigned." The air shifted to the Phoenix directive. He finished. Gasps again, this time sharper edged with disbelief. Elise felt her stomach tighten. She knew that name, everyone did. It wasn't a department. It was a whispered myth. A project buried beneath layers of secrecy and clearance codes. "Sir, she hasn't been vetted," Keller began. Adrian cut him off with the faintest shrug. "I just vetted her." Then, buttoning his stained jacket, with unbothered elegance, he said, "Miss Quinn, my office." 15 minutes, 14 minutes, and 30 seconds later, Elise stood before a door that might as well have belonged to a vault. She knocked. The sound was soft, but to her, it echoed. Enter his office felt like a mind made physical, calm, controlled, deliberate. Nothing extraneous. Even the skyline beyond the glass seemed more precise. From this height, he didn't look at her. "Do you know why you're here?" She swallowed. "Because I ruined your suit, and you either want to fire me or assign me to clean every lab bench in the building." He turned slowly, just enough that she saw the trace of something almost human cross his face. "Honesty. That's rare." He motioned toward the chair across from his. "You're here," he said, "because the way you think could change everything. Your work fits the directive better than anyone we've seen." He slid a thick folder toward her. "But before you read it," he said, his gaze cool but clear, "there's something you should understand. This project lives by rules, and so do I." He raised a hand, counting on his fingers, each point measured like a man trying to keep order in a world that never stopped unraveling. One professional distance always. The rest of the rules would come, but in that moment Elise sensed what mattered more than any list. This was no ordinary assignment. It was a doorway to discovery, danger, and something far deeper than she yet understood. "Second," Adrian said quietly, ticking another rule off his fingers. "Your past stays yours. We don't discuss personal lives. Not here." "Third, if it isn't about the project, it doesn't need to be said." He continued, voice steady as stone. "Fourth, you never challenge my decisions in front of the team. Fifth, whatever happens in this lab stays here. Always." Elise sat still, hands folded in her lap, listening as the rules unfolded, like bars on a cage, her brow furrowed. That sounds less like a workplace and more like a prison. Adrian didn't flinch. He leaned in slightly, his gaze unshakable. "It's how I keep chaos out, Miss Quinn." Order delivers results, then softer, but with weight. The Phoenix Directive has the potential to save millions. If a few boundaries keep that hope alive, is that too much to ask? Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them shifted, something unspoken electric, alive. No, Mr. Vale, she said softly. It's not too much, good, he replied, and slid a document toward her. This is the non-disclosure agreement. Sign it, and we begin tomorrow. As Elise scanned the contract, the door opened without a knock. A tall man stepped in rigid posture, sharp eyes, presence like cold iron. Mr. Vale. Your father is online. 1. Adrian's jaw tightened only slightly, but enough. Tell Lawrence I'm in a meeting. He said it's urgent. It always is. The warmth drained from Adrian's face, replaced by a carefully constructed mask. Elise, this is Elliot Vance. Head of security. Vance turned toward her, his stare openly suspicious. You're joining the Phoenix team. Adrian nodded before she could answer. I've already cleared her. Vance lingered, just long enough to make his doubt known, then left without a word. Elise exhaled slowly, signed the document, and stood. Just as she reached the door, Adrian's voice stopped her. One more thing, Miss Quinn. She turned, surprised. Why did you choose Helix? There was no hesitation in her response. Because you're building something that matters, Mr. Vale, and I want my life to matter too. For a moment, something behind his eyes flickered, something that didn't fit the man of rules and restraint. Tomorrow, he said, 7:00 sharp. Don't be late that night. In a modest apartment filled with second-hand books and quiet dreams, Elise sat on the edge of her bed, the Phoenix Directive file resting like a secret in her lap. She traced the edges of the folder, already feeling the weight of something she couldn't name. Far above the city, in a penthouse bathed in moonlight and silence, Adrian Vale stared at her background check on a glowing screen, wondering if he had just made the one choice that could unravel everything he'd built. 3 weeks later, Elise was alone in the lab. It was past midnight. The world outside slept, but inside, Helix. Time blurred into light, screens casting gentle glows, numbers dancing across her vision. Her eyes burned, but her mind raced. The data still didn't align. Something was off. And then a soft hiss. The lab door opened. Adrian Vale stepped inside. His tie hung loose, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. For the first time, he looked human, a man. Not just a machine behind a desk. You're still here, he said, not asking. The degradation rates, Elise murmured, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. They weren't consistent with the simulations, but I think I know why. He moved closer, close enough for her to catch the quiet trace of his cologne sandalwood and memory. He leaned over the screen, his shoulder nearly brushing hers, his voice low and approving. You adjusted the binding algorithm. She nodded, eyes fixed on the data. The original model didn't account for antioxidant interference. I rerouted the response. She pulled up a simulation. He reached to assist, fingers brushing hers just briefly, and in that small accidental contact, something shifted again. But neither of them spoke it. Not yet. Watch what happens, Adrian murmured, reaching past her to enter a command. Their hands met, barely just a brush of skin, but in that instant, something undeniable passed between them, a flicker of electricity that neither expected and both felt. He pulled away, as if burned. The steel in his voice returned. Rule 1, Miss Quinn. Elise turned to face him, not flinching. This time, you're the one who leaned in, she said quietly. Their eyes met, not directly, but reflected in the glass of the monitor. Twin reflections caught in a moment. Neither of them named Adrian. Cleared his throat and stepped back. Run the simulation overnight. I want the results by morning. He turned to go, but Elise's voice stopped him. Your coffee. He looked back. The cup still sat where he'd left it, black with a single sugar. What about it? You drink it the same way every day, same mug, same time. Her voice was soft, observational, not accusing. Another one of your rules? A shadow passed over his face, darker than annoyance, older than routine. No, he said, after a pause. It's not a rule. It's a habit. He looked at the floor as if the words themselves tasted bitter. Rules are for protection, habits just happen. He turned but stopped again, this time with something heavier behind his eyes. Why are you really here, Elise? She blinked. I told you. Enzyme degradation. No, he interrupted, his voice quieter now. Why this company? Why this project? You had other options. The question hovered between them like something sacred. Elise could have danced around it, but she didn't. Because I know what it's like to wait for help that never comes, she said, and I want to build something that changes that. My mother didn't have time, something, in Adrian's face cracked not enough to shatter, but enough to show it wasn't made of stone. He nodded once, then left. The next morning the lab was already humming. When Elise arrived, Adrian was there, hair slightly damp, as if he'd come straight from a cold shower rather than sleep. He looked up. Your modification worked. He gestured toward the glowing screen. Cellular uptake increased by 43%. Elise blinked. That's better than I expected. We start phase 2 trials today. He handed her a tablet. The team's already been notified. As she flipped through the notes, her eyes caught on something tucked beneath a stack of folders on his desk. A photograph. 2 young men, identical, laughing arms slung around each other, in front of snow-covered mountains, Adrian, and someone else, a mirror of him, only warmer, lighter. Before she could stop herself, the words left her lips. Is that your brother, Adrian? Froze. His expression didn't shift. He just reached over, quietly slid the photo out of view. Rule 2, he said. Personal lives stay personal. Before Elise could apologize, the door opened. Elliot Vance stepped in. As always, too alert, too calculating. There was a breach last night, he said flatly. Someone tried to access the Phoenix servers. Adrian's entire demeanor changed. The calm fractured into something sharper, internal or external, unclear, Vance said. I've already informed your father. Adrian's voice hardened. He doesn't need to be involved. He disagrees. Vance held out a phone. He wants to speak to you. Now Adrian took it, without a word, and stepped away. Vance, meanwhile, turned to Elise. You keep unusual hours, Miss Quinn. I work when the data calls for it, she replied calmly. You're welcome to check the logs. Oh, I have, Vance said, smile tight, never reaching his eyes. I check everything. Adrian reappeared, voice curt and final. Pack up what we need. We're moving the project. Elise turned to him, startled. We're my private facility in Vermont, he said, already moving. It's isolated, secure, no distractions, no surveillance. He glanced at Vance. Only essential personnel, core team, minimum security. But your father, Vance began. I'm not asking for permission, Adrian cut him off. And just like that, everything Elise thought she understood about this project began to shift. Be ready to leave in 3 hours, Adrian said, ending the conversation with a finality that left no room for debate. The others followed his order without question, but Elise lingered behind. The lab was quiet, now empty except for the hum of machines and the echo of her own thoughts. She moved slowly, gathering her notes, her mind still tethered to that unfinished conversation and the tension beneath it. Then her gaze caught on the photo again, the same one she'd glimpsed before, this time no longer hiding from it. She reached for it carefully, as though afraid it might disappear in her hands. 2 men identical, in every feature, but not in presence. Smiling, sunlit, carefree, arms around each other, in front of a backdrop of rugged pine-covered mountains. On the back in familiar handwriting, Adrian and Nolan, Green Mountains. Last summer together, the writing was unmistakably his, and yet the warmth in it felt like it belonged to someone else, someone she hadn't met. She slipped the photo back into its hiding place. But a question now burned at the edges of her mind. What had happened to turn that smiling young man into the man who built walls of rules around his heart? That afternoon, their convoy moved steadily north, away from the glittering skyline of Manhattan, away from the towering headquarters of Helix. The further they drove, the quieter it became. Snow began to fall, soft, slow, indifferent, to the weight of what they carried. Elise sat beside Adrian in the back of a black SUV, watching the world grow wilder. Outside the window, he worked on his laptop in silence, the glow of the screen reflecting off his glasses. Between them sat not just space, but silence, the kind that felt intentional. But with each passing mile, the silence started to feel less like distance and more like fragility. The research facility revealed itself like something half-dreamed, rising from the mist among the green mountains. Glass and steel sharp lines and soft snow. It looked like it had been grown, not built. Part sanctuary, part fortress, Adrian spoke for the first time since they'd left the city. Welcome to the mountain house. His voice was steady, but something in it hinted at memory. It's beautiful, Elise said, eyes wide. It's secure, he replied. Beauty wasn't the point. The facility was smaller than their main headquarters, but she could already sense its power. Everything about it was intentional, refined, stripped down. Only the core team had made the trip. And notably, Vance hadn't. Adrian handed her a keycard. East Wing is yours. The lab's operational. 24 hours a day. We reconvene in 2 hours to align protocols. Before she could respond, he was already walking away, voice low as he answered a call, his figure vanishing into the heart of the facility. Don't let it get to you, a voice said beside her. Dr. Sophia Lynn stood with arms folded, eyes kind despite the weariness behind them. I've worked with Adrian for 5 years. I've never seen him like this, Elise turned. Is it always this intense? Sophia hesitated, then shook her head. No, not like this. But this isn't just any project. She lowered her voice slightly. The Phoenix Directive was Nolan's idea, Adrian's twin. Elise felt the air still. I didn't know he had a brother. Not many do. Nolan died 7 years ago. Car accident. Sophia's expression dimmed, the weight of loss returning to her face. It changed Adrian. Before that, he laughed more, took risks. Nolan was the dreamer. Adrian made things happen. They were a perfect storm, Elise thought again of the photograph. 2 versions of the same face, one full of light, the other now made of stone. Was Nolan a scientist too? Sophia nodded. He was the heart of this. Everything we're building now, it started in his notebooks. She glanced at her watch and smiled faintly. I shouldn't be telling you this. Rule 2. And all that. 2 hours later, the team gathered in the main lab. The air was sharper here, the stakes higher. Digital displays lit up with maps, gene sequences, and data projections. Everyone leaned in, waiting. Adrian stood at the front shoulders, squared eyes, colder than the mountain snow outside. We're accelerating the timeline, he announced. There were no greetings, no pleasantries, just urgency. Because something deeper than ambition was driving him now. Elise could feel it. And though none of them said it out loud, they all knew, this wasn't just science anymore. It was a race against memory, against grief, against the rules that had held Adrian Vale together. And might soon begin to break. Adrian stood before the team like a man chasing time. We have 90 days, he said. Voice firm, Phase 2 trials must be completed. Within that window, the room stilled. No one questioned the urgency. They felt it in his tone, in the way he didn't blink between sentences. Given recent breaches, all data remains in-house. No cloud, no external servers. We're on a closed loop until further notice, Doctor. Richards, a seasoned analyst with silver at his temples, frowned. That's a brutal timeline. The synthesis alone could take. We can make it work, Elise said suddenly, her voice clear, cutting through the murmur of doubt. All eyes turned to her. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Explain, she stepped forward, fingers tapping quickly as she brought up her models. We're running trials in sequence, she said, pointing to the diagram. But if we layer them parallel streams with complementary markers, we'll double the data flow without doubling the time silence followed. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from disbelief, it was the kind that considered possibility. Adrian studied the screen, then her. It's unorthodox, he said. But mathematically sound, Elise replied, her eyes steady on his. A beat passed. Then the corner of his mouth lifted, not a smile, but something close. Implement it. He turned to the team. Adjust your protocols. We start now. The days blurred into each other. Lights never dimmed. Coffee never cooled. Sleep came in fragments, if at all, and most nights, deep in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, Elise found herself working alone. Or almost alone. Adrian was always nearby, focused, unshakable. They rarely spoke of anything but the work, but slowly something shifted, not in words, in gestures, in silence. In the way they no longer needed to explain their logic, because the other already understood. It was a mutual gravity, one neither fully acknowledged. On the 8th night, winter descended in full force. Winds howled through the mountains, battering the thick windows with relentless fists of snow. Elise was tracing cellular reactions when the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then darkness. Seconds later, the low hum of emergency generators rose from beneath the floor. Dim lights returned, casting long shadows. The lab equipment remained still. From the doorway, a familiar voice. Only essential systems are live. Adrian stepped into the room, his face lit only by the pale glow of his phone. When will the main grid be back? Elise asked. He set a lantern down beside her. Hard to say. Morning, if we're lucky. He glanced at the monitors, then at her. We should conserve battery. Landlines are out too, she nodded, a chill running deeper than the air. The storm had cut them off completely. Just two people, in a world of glass steel and silence. You should get some rest, he said. We won't get anything more done tonight. But almost as if to contradict him, the temperature dropped again. He frowned, the heating systems weakening. The residential wing has a fireplace. They walked in silence. The halls felt different in the dark, less clinical, more intimate. The only light came from Adrian's lantern, casting soft halos on polished floors. The lounge, when they reached it, was warmer. Not just from the fireplace, but from something less tangible. He moved to tend the flames with a practiced hand. Elise stood nearby, unsure the rules they'd lived by in the lab felt misplaced here. Too rigid for the quiet between them. Sit, he said at last, gesturing toward the sofa. We're not going anywhere till dawn. She did. He returned a moment later with 2 glasses and a bottle of scotch. To keep the cold at bay, he said, pouring carefully. She accepted the glass, watching him with quiet curiosity. Is this an exception to Rule 3? She asked. Voice light, Adrian stared into the amber liquid in his own glass. A moment of reflection passing through him. Extraordinary circumstances, he said softly, require flexibility. Then he sat across from her, no titles, no protocols, just 2 people, surrounded by firelight and snow, and whatever this quiet thing was that had begun to grow between them. Adrian stared into the firelight, its glow dancing across his features, softening edges that were usually sharpened by control, I suppose. Even I recognize the need for exceptions, he murmured. Elise turned slightly toward him, her voice gentle but honest. Do you? Because your rules. They feel like walls, not structure. He didn't respond immediately, just looked at her. Really looked As if her words unsettled something, he thought long, buried. Rules create structure, he finally said. Structure keeps things safe. Safe from what? The question slipped out, more vulnerable than she intended. It hung between them, like mist on a winter morning, quiet but impossible to ignore. Adrian didn't retreat, didn't hide behind protocol. From chaos, he said softly, from the unpredictability people carry with them, the messes they make without meaning to. She hesitated, then asked what she knew. She probably shouldn't have. Is that what Nolan was to you? A complication. Adrian went utterly still. For a moment, Elise regretted it, afraid she'd broken something delicate. His voice when it came was low, measured. How do you know about my brother? Dr. Lynn told me, she said quietly, and I saw the photograph in the lab. She braced herself for anger, for a reminder of Rule 2, but none came. Instead, Adrian set his glass down and turned toward the fire, his expression shadowed voice barely above a whisper. Nolan was chaos, he said. Brilliant, reckless, fearless, everything. I wasn't everything Phoenix was meant to be. Before it became mine, the truth sat between them, raw and unfiltered, and for the first time, Elise saw it, not as weakness, but as the first crack in a fortress, carefully built over grief. Outside, the storm still screamed against the windows, but inside the fire warmed, not just the room, but something deeper, something quietly unraveling between them. Two people stranded by snow, and perhaps by something more, not quite enemies, not quite allies, not yet something else, but close. Morning light spilled through frost-kissed windows as Elise stirred beneath a soft wool blanket. She sat up slowly, blinking at the unfamiliar stillness. The fire had died down. Adrian was gone. On the coffee table, a note in neat handwriting, power restored, lab operational, AV. And just like that, the man who'd let her glimpse beneath his armor had vanished. Behind it again, the lab was alive when she arrived. Screens flickered, voices murmured. The rhythm of progress had resumed. Elise threw herself into the work, into numbers and proteins, into patterns that made more sense than people. Her revised trial protocol was yielding results far faster than expected. Even Maxwell's, no Adrian's most ambitious projections were being surpassed. 2 weeks after the storm, she was mid-sequence when the screen flashed a spike in readings. Her heart skipped. Dr. Lynn, she called out urgency, threading her voice. Can you check this? Sophia hurried over, her eyes widened. 87% stabilization. That's unprecedented. A quiet voice behind them finished the thought. Unheard of. Adrian had arrived as he always did, without sound, but with perfect timing. It was as if he could sense breakthroughs before they happened. The rest of the team gathered, drawn by the tone in his voice, the shift in energy. Elise pulled up the graphs. The cells are holding. No degradation. The new mechanism works. We replicate it immediately. Adrian said, but his voice held something unusual, not command hope. It flickered behind his words, just barely restrained. And then for the first time since they began this work, they all saw it. The possibility of what they were doing, not just the science, the change, the healing. And in Adrian's eyes, for a split second, Elise glimpsed not the man who clung to rules, but the brother who once believed in something wild and beautiful. No one expected it. Least of all, Elise. But that night, Adrian Vale did something completely out of character. He ordered champagne. This milestone deserves to be acknowledged, he said as the team gathered in the lounge, still wearing their lab coats, exhaustion, clinging to their shoulders like mist. You've accomplished in weeks what experts estimated would take months. Flutes were passed, fizzing softly with celebration. Then Adrian lifted his glass, not generally, but directly toward her. To Miss Quinn, he said, eyes steady on hers, for the insight no model could predict, and the courage to trust it anyway. Heat spread through Elise's chest, not from the alcohol, but from something deeper, recognition. And as Adrian smiled, really smiled, it wasn't the man of protocol she saw. It was the man in the photograph. The one who used to laugh beside his twin before the weight of rules replaced wonder as the celebration mellowed one by one. The others quietly slipped away until only two figures remained by the tall windows. Outside, snow blanketed the mountains like a secret. "You didn't need to credit me," Elise said softly, leaning against the glass. "It was a team effort." Adrian joined her hands in his pockets. "I don't offer credit where it's not earned. False praise is just another kind of manipulation." She gave a soft laugh. "Is that one of your famous rules?" "Maybe it should be," he replied, but the usual steel in his tone was absent. It had melted into something warmer, gentler. When Elise turned, she found him already watching her. Not with command, but with something more complicated. Admiration, curiosity. Maybe even hope. "Why did you really choose me for this project?" She asked the question too old to keep inside any longer. Adrian didn't answer right away. "Then your paper," he said. "It reminded me of Nolan. You think like he did, bold steps, grounded in reason." He looked away, voice lower now, but honestly. "It was that first moment, the coffee spill. You didn't crumble. You stood there, embarrassed, sure but not broken. I thought," he continued, "maybe you'd understand what this project was meant to be." She was quiet, listening with more than her ears. "And what's that?" she finally asked. He exhaled as if the words hurt to hold in. "A legacy, Nolan's vision. A way to make sure he didn't die for nothing." The rawness in his voice knocked the breath from her. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "Die for nothing." His face changed, closing in like a door partway shut. "It's late," he said, moving to retreat. But she reached out. For the first time, she touched him deliberately. "Please," she said. He looked down at her hand, surprised by the contact, then back at her eyes, and something shifted, a breath, a decision. The accident, he said, finally happened the day after Nolan threatened to expose irregularities in Helix's clinical trials. Elise's heart thudded. "Your father's trials." Adrian nodded slowly. "Nothing happens near my father without intent, but I've never had proof." His jaw tightened, eyes shadowed with quiet torment. Without thinking, Elise gave his arm a gentle squeeze. Wordless, but filled with something that had no place on paper. This time he didn't pull away. Instead, he reached for her hand and covered it with his own, gently, deliberately. And for one suspended moment, the rules that had governed every breath between them simply dissolved. Adrian's gaze dropped to her lips. His body leaned closer so slightly it was almost imperceptible. Elise felt it, not as fear, but as electricity. She thought he might kiss her. Instead, he pulled away. The connection snapped like a silk thread, pulled too tight. "Rule 1, he said, hoarsely, stepping back. "Professional distance." Elise looked at him, searching. "Is that really what you want?" The question settled between them, like snow. "What I want," Adrian replied, already rebuilding his walls, "is irrelevant." She didn't let it go. "So, is this about the project? Or is it about your rules?" He met her eyes with something almost defiant. "They're the same thing," he said, but even as he said it, something in his voice betrayed the truth. They weren't anymore. Adrian's voice sharpened, retreating once again into the armor he knew best. "Good night, Miss Quinn." There was nothing more to say, or at least nothing he'd allow himself to sit frustrated, confused. Elise walked the long corridor, alone, her footsteps soft against the polished floor. The firelight from earlier still lingered on her skin, but his distance had returned, like a closing door. As she passed by Adrian's private office, something strange caught her eye. The door, usually locked, usually sacred, stood slightly ajar, not like him. She paused, then pushed it open. "Adrian?" she called quietly. No answer. The office was empty, but not lifeless. A soft glow pulsed from his computer. Papers lay scattered across the desk. Far messier than the man she knew, she stepped closer, her breath catching as she scanned the contents. Accident reports, newspaper clippings, crumpled photographs of crushed metal notes, scribbled in familiar handwriting. And in the center, an old folder marked Restricted. LRS only. Curiosity battled caution. But something deeper instinct won. She opened it. Encrypted files, technical terms she didn't understand, but one word repeated across them all. Aurora. Her heart pounded. These documents weren't just about science. They were about what came before. Before the Phoenix Directive. Before the rules. Before Nolan died. Hands shaking, Elise quickly snapped photos of a few key pages, then returned everything exactly as she found it. She was turning to leave when the doorway darkened. Adrian stood there, still silent. His voice, when it came, was cold enough to stop time. Looking for me, she froze. Yes, I wanted to talk about earlier, he cut in. Walking slowly toward her was a mistake. He glanced at the desk, eyes landing on the slightly shifted folder, one I won't repeat. But Elise didn't retreat. These documents, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady, they go back to before Nolan's accident, don't they? Adrian's shoulders stiffened. You went through my files. The door was open, she said quietly. But Adrian, if these prove what happened to Nolan, you can't just hide them. Get out, he snapped. But this time his voice trembled with something closer to fear than anger. No, Elise said, standing her ground. You brought me into this. If your father is involved, if this project is at risk, I deserve to know. They stared at each other, the air thick with everything unsaid. Then Adrian's voice dropped hollow and raw. My father would destroy anyone who threatened his control, he said, even his own son. The truth hit the room like a winter wind, a secret so long, buried, it felt like ash on his tongue. The admission cost him something. Elise saw it in his eyes, a man unraveling beneath decades of silence. She stepped closer, her voice softer now. Then, let me help you. We can figure this out together. His eyes flickered, something inside him resisting, something else hoping. Why, he whispered. Why would you risk it? Because I believe in Aurora, she said, then after a breath even softer. And because I'm starting to believe in you. The words didn't echo. They sank deep and changed everything. This time when Adrian moved, he didn't stop. He crossed the space between them slowly, as if afraid the moment would vanish if he rushed it. Then his lips found hers. Tentative at first, unsure, but when Elise responded, it deepened into something that had waited too long. His arms circled her, her hands slid to his shoulders. Years of discipline dissolved in a heartbeat of truth. When they finally parted, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers, grounding himself in the one person who saw the man behind the mask. I've wanted to do that, he confessed, since the day you stood up to me in that boardroom. Elise gave a small, almost breathless laugh. Rule 1, she reminded him. He smiled, tired but real. Rules, he whispered, can be rewritten. Outside snow began to fall again. Quiet, patient, relentless. Inside, two people stood together in the glow of a truth they could no longer unsee. And though danger still loomed, though the road ahead was steep, for the first time they would walk it side by side in the quiet hum of the corporate jet. Elise and Adrian sat side by side, yet miles apart. Words were few, glances rarer, but when their eyes did meet, something passed between them that no distance could disguise. Before takeoff, Adrian had spoken only once. We keep this between us. My father's reach is longer than you think, she nodded. And now as their car wound through the streets of Boston toward Helix headquarters, Elise studied him in profile. His jaw was tense, his gaze locked on the road ahead, The man she'd seen by firelight, raw, open, human, was gone. In his place stood the polished executive, impeccable, untouchable, the gala. Elise said finally, "Do you still want me to go?" "Yes," Adrian replied without hesitation. "It's the perfect cover." He glanced at her, just briefly. "My father will be watching me." Not the new researcher, with a quiet badge and a terminal in the corner. The annual Helix Foundation Gala was a lavish affair, ostensibly for medical fundraising, but in truth, a showcase of wealth, image, and control. And this year it would serve a second purpose: distraction. "I moved the files to a secure, internal server," Adrian said, his voice low. "You'll access them from the research library. Everyone will think you're preparing for your upcoming presentation. And your father," he gave a dry smile. "I've had years of practice pretending for him at Helix." They parted ways without ceremony. Adrian disappeared into back-to-back meetings. Elise returned to the lab. There in silence, she began the slow and meticulous work of decrypting the documents she'd captured in Vermont. The process was difficult, but not beyond her. Her background in computational biology gave her the keys to doors she hadn't expected to open, and what she found on the other side stunned her. The original Aurora. Not as it existed now, but as Nolan had envisioned it. It wasn't just a breakthrough in cellular regeneration. It had been built to be affordable, universal, a treatment for autoimmune disease that could change lives, not just line pockets, but someone. Lawrence Reed had altered its path. The design had been rewritten, not for accessibility, but exclusivity. Not to heal the world, but to sell it at a price only the privileged could pay, Elise's. Hands trembled as she downloaded the decrypted files to a secure drive. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Oh my God, this wasn't just greed. It was a betrayal of Nolan, of science, of everyone who'd ever believed in what Aurora was meant to be. And then she wasn't alone." A shadow fell across her desk. She looked up. Elliot Vance, standing too still, watching too closely. Burning the midnight oil, Miss Quinn, his smile was thin. Empty. She minimized the screen with practiced calm, just tying up loose ends. Before the gala, she said. He stepped closer, eyes flicking toward the monitor she'd just concealed. "Interesting work. Routine analysis," she replied, positioning herself between him and the screen. "If you'll excuse me, I need to change." Vance didn't move. "You and Mr. Vale seemed particularly productive in Vermont." The implication lingered, sharp, invasive. Elise met his gaze. Calm, controlled. "The whole team worked hard. That's why we were chosen." Vance finally stepped aside, but not before adding, "Mr. Vale, Senior, is looking forward to meeting you tonight." He paused. "He's curious about the woman who seems to have inspired his son." The message was clear. Lawrence Vale was watching. That evening, the sterile lobby of Helix was transformed into a stage of shimmering elegance. Crystals hung like icicles from vaulted ceilings. Waiters passed champagne flutes like whispers. The city's elite floated between conversation and pretense. Elise moved among them in a borrowed midnight blue gown, poised still, but every step measured. The encrypted drive rested quietly in her clutch, and the truth she now carried was heavier than anything she'd ever worn. Across the room, beneath the soft golden chandeliers, Adrian Vale stood as still and polished as a sculpture in black, impeccable, in a tuxedo composed in every line of his posture. Beside him, in conversation, was a man Elise recognized instantly from boardroom photographs: Lawrence Vale. Even from across the room, the resemblance between father and son was haunting. But where Adrian's presence was cool and calculated, Lawrence's carried a sharper edge, like frost that cuts. Elise moved with purpose, a flute of champagne in one hand, a mask of calm on her face. As she passed, Adrian's eyes found hers. Just for a moment, it was enough. A glance, a signal. They were still in this together. The research library was quiet, almost reverent in its stillness. She slipped inside and found an empty terminal, fingers steady as she inserted the encrypted drive. The screen flickered to life. The transfer began. As the progress bar crawled forward, Elise allowed herself a deeper look at the files, at the raw, unfiltered truth hidden in corporate corridors. One email thread stopped her breath. N refuses to abandon his ridiculous affordable access agenda, threatens to go public. If we don't comply, might need reminding where loyalty lies, the reply, handle it. We've invested too much to let idealism interfere. M will be easier to control once he's alone. Her heart thundered. The timestamp 3 days before Nolan's accident. She barely heard the soft chime as the transfer completed. She pocketed the drive and turned to leave, and froze. Lawrence Vale stood in the doorway. "Miss Quinn," he said, voice smooth as silk over ice, working during a party. How admirably devoted, Elise. Summoned a smile, practiced and hollow. "Just checking numbers for next week's presentation." "Of course," he said. Stepping inside, the door shut behind him with a quiet click. Suddenly she was surrounded not by walls, but by his presence. "I've heard quite a bit about you. The brilliant mind from modest roots." There was no admiration in his tone, only scrutiny. "Adrian has always had a sharp eye for talent," he continued, "though at times it's clouded." "I'm not sure what you mean." His smile was thin, dangerous. "Tell me, Miss Quinn, does the name Thomas Quinn mean anything to you?" The words hit like a slap. She blinked. "That's my father." "Yes," he said, stepping closer. "Convicted of embezzlement fraud 7 years ago. A pharmaceutical subsidiary." Elise's breath caught. Her father, the trial, the shame, the wound that never truly healed. "He always said he was framed," she said softly, "that he found accounting discrepancies and was silence." Lawrence's gaze didn't shift. "Interesting timing, isn't it? 7 years ago, around the same time Nolan died, the implication curled in the air like smoke." "I believe my father was innocent," she said. Firmly, "the courts didn't," Lawrence replied. He took another step forward, voice calm, blade sharp. "What I find fascinating is that Adrian seems unaware of your connection, a curious lapse in his usually thorough vetting process. Or was it something you deliberately kept from him before Elise could speak?" Another voice entered the room. She was vetted. Adrian stood in the doorway. His voice was steady, but his eyes, they burned. Lawrence turned unconcerned. "We were simply becoming better acquainted." "You mean intimidating her with facts you hoped she'd keep buried?" Lawrence's expression remained unreadable. "Did you know her father was convicted of trying to defraud us?" he asked casually. "I know he was implicated in a case involving Helix Pharmaceuticals," Adrian said evenly. "I also know the evidence was circumstantial." Elise turned stunned. He had known from the beginning, and he still chose her. Still believed in her. Lawrence's mask of composure cracked just slightly. "You brought her into Phoenix knowing this." Adrian didn't hesitate. "Yes, I choose based on merit," Adrian said, his voice steady. "Not bloodlines." Then, without looking at his father, he turned to Elise. "Miss Quinn, would you give us a moment?" But Lawrence stepped in. "Actually," he said coolly, "I'd like Elliot to escort Miss Quinn to my office. We still have things to discuss." Right on cue. "Elliot." Vance appeared in the doorway. His presence, as always, too convenient. "Take Miss Quinn to my office," Lawrence ordered, "and wait with her." Adrian's jaw tightened. The movement was slight, but Elise saw it. "That's not necessary," Adrian said. Lawrence's voice cut it across the room like ice on glass. "It's quite necessary, especially after what Elliot discovered on her terminal earlier today." Vance stepped forward and held out a tablet. On the screen, security footage. Elise, the library, the encrypted files. Adrian's expression didn't change, but Elise saw the flicker of tension behind his eyes. Concern masked in control she's been digging, Lawrence said. Into files she had no right to access. Files tied to Nathaniel. Files, you don't have clearance for. The air grew colder, Elliot, Lawrence said. Without looking back, escort her. We'll join you shortly. Vance took her arm, firm, not brutal, but enough to remind her who was in control. As they moved through the glittering crowd, Elise caught Adrian's gaze. He gave her nothing but silence, but in his eyes she read the message, play along. In the elevator, Vance's grip didn't ease. You should have known better, he muttered. Some secrets aren't worth discovering. Elise didn't look at him. Like what happened to Nolan? Vale, his eyes narrowed. I'd be very careful. Miss Quinn, people who push too hard tend to vanish. The elevator continued its quiet ascent, each floor a step closer to whatever reckoning waited at the top. Lawrence Vale's office was not an office. It was a fortress, glass steel and polished stone. A panoramic view of Boston stretched beyond like a kingdom, under watchful eyes. Vance led her to a single chair, opposite the desk, then took his place by the door, arms folded, a sentinel. Do you understand the trouble you're in? He asked, voice cool as marble. I understand more than you think, Elise replied, pulse pounding. Her fingers brushed the encrypted drive, still hidden in her clutch. You've committed corporate espionage, he said. No, she said calmly. I uncovered a cover-up, possibly worse murder. Is it now? Vance raised an eyebrow. You're desperate. Wild accusations won't save you. She said nothing more. Just waited. Trusted time crawled. 30 minutes passed. Then the elevator chimed. Adrian stepped out alone. His face was unreadable, but something simmered beneath the surface. Rage, yes, but measured, controlled. Vance straightened. Where's your father? Still downstairs, sir, he said. I don't care, Adrian cut in. Leave us? Your father said. I said leave. The shift in Adrian's tone was seismic. Even Vance flinched. He took a step forward, now Elliot. Or I'll have you removed. For a moment neither moved. Then Vance exhaled, slow and sharp, and walked out. The doors slid shut behind him. And everything changed. Adrian exhaled hard. His posture shifted, no longer the executive, but the man behind the mask. We have 3 minutes before he calls my father. His voice was low, urgent. Did you finish the transfer? Elise nodded. Yes, but Adrian, he knows. He knows everything about me, about my father. Adrian didn't flinch. I've always known Elise. Adrian crossed the room in silence, drawing the blinds ever so slightly as if to shield their words from the eyes he knew were always watching. Your father, he began softly, was convicted the same month Nolan died. Elise's breath caught. They both raised concerns about the same division. They saw the same patterns. The connection wasn't difficult to make, and still she said barely above a whisper, You hired me. He turned back to her, his voice quiet but unwavering. I hired you because you're brilliant, because you see things others don't, and because, he paused, a rare crack in his composure. I hoped you could help me uncover what really happened. She blinked. So you used me. There it was. The wound, raw, and open. Adrian's eyes clouded. At first, yes. The words landed hard. But Vermont, what happened there between us that wasn't a strategy? That was real. Before she could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. He's coming. Adrian crossed the room and pressed a key card into her hand. Executive elevator basement garage. Blue Tesla level 2. Go to your apartment. Pack only what you need, then check into the Beacon Hill hotel room under Sarah Clark. I'll find you. You want me to run? She didn't hide the disbelief in her voice. I want you alive, he said, voice now soft as snow. Let me deal with my father. The elevator chimed. He looked at her one last time. Please? Elise, and she went. She slipped out the side door just as Lawrence Vale entered Vance at his heels. The cold air outside hit her like reality. The ride to her apartment blurred into fragments, headlights, crosswalks, trembling thoughts. Had any of it been real? The kiss in the firelight, the quiet moments between the chaos, had it all been part of some greater calculation? When she reached her building, instinct kicked in before thought. The door was already ajar. Inside, her world had been torn apart. Drawers pulled, files scattered, books overturned, her laptop gone. Someone had been searching for something, the drive. She pressed a hand to her purse, where it still lay hidden, heavier now, loaded with truth. She began packing, moving. Fast but careful, and then footsteps in the hallway. She froze. Moved bathroom window. Fire escape. Her apartment door creaked open. Just as she slipped behind the door, "She's not here," a voice muttered. "Search again," came another Vance. "Lawrence wants those files." Elise didn't wait. She climbed into the night, each rung of the fire escape echoing in her chest. 2 hours later, she stood in a quiet hotel room, under a borrowed name, the city lights barely reaching the window. On the bed, her findings spread like puzzle pieces, and the picture they formed was horrifying. Nolan hadn't just discovered financial irregularities, he'd found evidence of unauthorized human trials. Desperate experiments carried out in remote parts of the world, no oversight, no consent, just numbers, just results. When he'd threatened to expose it, Lawrence had made sure he never got the chance. And then Aurora, once meant to be hope, for all twisted into a luxury only the elite could afford. And worse still, Elise found her father's name, a file, a memo, an email thread. Thomas Quinn had uncovered the same evidence. And Lawrence had buried him the same way, framed him, discredited him, erased him. It had never been coincidence. It had always been intentional. 3 days passed nothing. Adrian's phone went straight to voicemail. The man who'd risked so much had vanished. The media buzzed. Adrian Vale on unexpected leave. Lawrence Vale resumes CEO position at Helix Bioworks. Elise's heart sank with every headline. But on the fourth morning, just as sunlight cracked through the curtains, a burner phone she'd purchased buzzed to life on the nightstand. Unknown number. She picked it up, hand trembling. "Hello." The call came just after sunrise, through the haze of sleepless days and unanswered questions. Elise said, the voice familiar, urgent. "Doctor Sophia Lynn, please don't hang up." Her breath caught. "Is he okay? Adrian?" A pause. "No," Sophia replied, voice grim. "After you left, there was an incident, a confrontation." Elise went cold. "He was removed. Security took him from the building." "That's impossible. He wouldn't just—" "They're saying he had a breakdown," Sophia cut in. "That he fabricated results. That he acted alone." The words felt unreal. "They're erasing him." "Exactly," Sophia said. "And you're next." "Elliot?" "Vance has been digging, questioning everyone about your relationship, your access to the encrypted files." Elise clutched the edge of the bed. "I need to see him. That's why I'm calling." Sophia whispered. "He got word to me. He wants to meet tonight. Dock 7, Boston Harbor, 9 p.m. Elise hesitated. Everything about it felt wrong. But what choice did she have? "I'll be there." Sophia's voice softened. "Elise, be careful." Something's very wrong inside Helix. By the time she reached the harbor, night had wrapped the city in silence. She moved like a shadow, checking every corner, every rooftop. The docks were deserted, except for one figure tall. Still familiar, her heart leapt. Adrian. But as the man turned, hope curdled into dread. "Elliot Vance, Miss Quinn," he said, smiling, without warmth. "You're so predictable." Her blood ran cold. "Where is he?" Indisposed. He stepped forward. "But don't worry, Lawrence would very much like that drive you stole. I don't have it." "I think you do." From behind, 2 men emerged from the shadows. And then chaos. She turned to run. Hands grabbed her arms. She kicked, twisted, broke free, just for a moment, then a sharp blow to the back of her head. Darkness, she awoke to silence, a heavy ache pulsed through her skull, her vision blurred. Then slowly cleared. She was strapped to a chair, around her broken monitors. Dust. A long-forgotten lab. The old Helix facility, before the towers, before the branding, before the lies. From the shadows, Lawrence Vale stepped into view. "Fitting, isn't it?" he said, voice smooth as silk pulled over barbed wire. "To end things where they began. Where's Adrian?" He didn't answer. "My son is no longer your concern," he began, circling her slowly like a lion, assessing a caged animal. "Tell me where the files are." She met his gaze. "So you can bury the truth." "The trials, Nolan. My father." For the first time, something flickered in his expression. "You've done your homework," he said softly. "More than Adrian ever managed. But knowledge," he added, leaning in, "means nothing. Without proof, I have proof," Elise said, "and I've sent it to people I trust. If anything happens to me, those files go public." Lawrence paused, then smiled. "You really are, as they said, too clever for your own good," he straightened Elliot. "She needs persuading. I have a board meeting to attend." He turned to leave. "Oh," he added casually, "it's the one where we officially remove Adrian from every position permanently." Sorrow. As the door clicked shut, Vance stepped forward, smile dark. "Let's start with something easy." His fingers flexed. "The password to your encrypted cloud storage." Miles away in a private penthouse laced with screens and encrypted access tunnels, Adrian Vale watched everything unfold. Footage streamed in security cams, access logs, internal emails. He stood like a storm, waiting to break. Beside him, a young man in glasses typed rapidly. Ryan Shun, Helix's IT wunderkind, loyal to Adrian. Since the day he protected him from his father's wrath, Ryan looked up. I've got a back door into every system, including surveillance at the old lab." Adrian's jaw clenched. "Then let's end this." "There's no trace in the logs," Ryan said, frustration in his voice. "It's like she vanished." Adrian, Vale's jaw clenched. "Track Vance's badge. He has access to facilities that don't exist in official records." Ryan nodded, hands moving rapidly across the keyboard. Then Adrian's phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Vale, a tentative female voice. "It's Melissa." From reception. His heart stilled. I think I saw something the night Miss Quinn disappeared. I stayed late. I saw Vance. He was escorting her to a car. She didn't look conscious." The words chilled him to the bone. "Did you see where they went?" "No. But I heard him say something to the driver. The original site." Adrian froze. "The original site, where Helix began, where Nolan had dreamed, where everything had once felt possible." "I've got him," Ryan said. Vance swiped into the Charlestown facility. 1 hour ago, Adrian was already moving. "Send me the location," and Ryan, "Send the evidence to the FBI." All of it its time, he grabbed his gear, moving with purpose, with fury, with love. In the weeks since Elise Quinn had spilled coffee on his suit, Adrian Vale's entire world had unraveled. And in its place, he'd found something far more dangerous. Truth. The old Helix lab stood like a forgotten cathedral. In the dark windows, blank the brick facade stained with time. Adrian moved like a shadow through its halls, disabling the outdated security. With codes only a Vale would know, the scent of dust and old ambition filled the air. Ahead, a low voice, Vance's. "You're backing the wrong brother," he said coldly. "Lawrence built this empire. Adrian will burn it down with his idealism." Then Elise's voice, weakened but clear. "You mean Nolan's vision? The one Lawrence killed to protect himself." A sharp crack, flesh against flesh. Adrian's grip tightened on the weapon at his side. Vance's voice lowered. "I'm done asking. Where's the drive?" Adrian stepped into the light, step away from her. Every head turned. He stood in the doorway, gun drawn, eyes burning. Vance barely blinked. Maxwell Adrian didn't flinch. "Unlike you, Elliot, I'm used to disappointing my father. You're about to disappoint yours for the last time. Vance signaled to the guards, 3 against 1. Adrian's voice didn't shake. He's not alone. From behind him, the room filled with motion. FBI weapons, raised orders, sharp hands where we can see them. The guards surrendered instantly, but Vance moved fast, grabbing Elise, blade flashing back off. He growled, pressing the edge to her throat, or she dies. Time stilled Adrian's voice, quiet, low, deadly. Don't for a single crystallized moment Adrian Vale saw only her, Elise, bound, bleeding. But her eyes, those fierce, unwavering eyes held no fear, only trust. Even now it's over, Elliot, Adrian said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than volume. The files have already been sent to the Justice Department. Lawrence's accounts have been frozen. There's nowhere left to run, Vance's lip curled. Your father will destroy you for this. Adrian's reply was ice. My father destroyed me the day he took Nolan from us. The doors burst open again. Lawrence Vale entered, flanked by private security, his presence colder than the air. Outside, his expression was pure fury. Stand down, Elliot. Vance hesitated, then obeyed. Stepping back, Adrian rushed to Elise's side, cutting through her restraints. With swift, practiced hands, "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice soft, now breaking. She nodded, eyes locked on Lawrence. "I'm fine." Lawrence swept his gaze across the scene, FBI agents' weapons drawn betrayal, thick in the air. He barely blinked. "Maxwell," he said as if scolding a child, "you never did learn how to play the long game." "What exactly do you think you're doing here?" Adrian stood, helping Elise to her feet. "What I should have done years ago," he said. "Fighting for justice for Nolan, for Thomas Quinn, for every life your ambition devoured." Lawrence's laugh echoed hollow through the lab. "Justice," he sneered. "There's no justice in business. Only winners and the ones they step on." He took a step closer. "I gave you everything, reigned you, trusted you, and you throw it all away for what?" Adrian's voice didn't rise. "I'm not throwing it away. I'm reclaiming what you stole, what you twisted Aurora was. Nolan's his dream, not yours to poison." Lawrence's face hardened. Nolan was weak. His sentimentality would have destroyed everything I built. His precious, affordable healthcare was nothing but a fantasy. "So you killed him," Adrian said, calm, final. The words filled the room. And for the first time, Lawrence didn't deny it. "I gave him a chance to back down. The brakes were supposed to fail gradually." A pause. The cliff was unfortunate timing. Even the agents froze at the coldness of it. Elise reached for Adrian's hand, her grip shaking. Lawrence kept speaking. "You could have been a titan, Adrian. You could have ruled the world." Adrian's eyes didn't leave his father's. "I'd rather heal it." A quiet voice broke the standoff. Lawrence Vale said, "The lead agent stepping forward, you are under arrest for conspiracy, corporate fraud, and the suspected murder of Nolan Vale." As agent stepped in, Lawrence turned one last time. "She will never replace what you lost today." His voice was empty, final. "The Vale name dies with me." Adrian didn't flinch. He simply watched as the man who had ruled his world through fear and silence was finally led away. "It's really over," Elise whispered. Adrian pulled her gently into his arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "No," he murmured, "it's just beginning." Dawn rose slowly over Boston Harbor, golden light spilling across a sky scrubbed clean by truth. FBI agents moved like ghosts across the old lab, gathering evidence marking the end of a regime. Adrian and Elise sat side by side on the bumper of an ambulance, the silence between them filled only with breath and the ache of everything they'd survived. "I thought," Elise began, "when I found out you knew about my father, I thought you might be part of it. I almost lost you because of my family's secrets," Adrian said quietly. "I won't let that happen again." The sun rose higher, warm against their faces. Adrian Vale sat in the ruins of an empire, And for the first time in his life, he felt free, because his rules had never protected him, but love just might, or perhaps the beginning. For years, Adrian Vale had lived by rules walls he built to keep the world out. But in the end, it was the woman who had broken every single one of them who set him free. 6 months later, spring returned to the Vermont mountains. What was once Adrian's isolated sanctuary, hidden in snow and silence, had bloomed into something entirely new. The facility, once secretive, guarded, impenetrable, was now alive with purpose. Glass walls reflected green valleys and morning light. Scientists from across the globe moved through open spaces, collaborating, creating a new name, adorned the entrance, and brushed steel, the Nathaniel Vale Institute for Accessible Medicine. Elise stood on the observation deck, a cup warming her hands, watching the atrium bustle below. "This view used to be so empty," she said quietly. "I know," Adrian replied, beside her, handing her coffee. "Now it's the most transparent research facility in the country." They stood in silence, the kind that only people who had survived something together could share. Lawrence Vale had been sentenced to 30 years, justice served not by vengeance but by truth. Westwood had been restructured from the inside out. The Aurora Project, Nolan's true legacy, had been fast-tracked for global access, not for profit. For people. Phase 3. Data came in. This morning, Adrian said, eyes still on the horizon. Cellular regeneration is holding steady at 92%. Elise smiled. Widespread? Trials begin next month. Their teamwork had become a rhythm, as natural as breathing. Adrian hesitated, then added softly. Thomas called. "The pardon's official. His record's been expunged." Elise's eyes shimmered. 3 months earlier, Adrian had stood before the president's legal counsel with one request to clear the name of the man whose life had been destroyed for telling the truth. Now, Thomas Quinn was free. "He asked about you," Elise said, blinking through a watery smile. "He's excited to meet the infamous Adrian Vale." Next week, Adrian winced, mock nervous. Do reformed corporate tyrants usually impress protective fathers? She laughed, leaning into him. "You'll do fine. Just don't mention your old rules." "Ah, yes," he chuckled. "The legendary Vale rules." She raised an eyebrow. "Rule 1. Had its moments. Professional distance at all times," he recited with a smirk before sliding his arms around her waist. A spectacular failure, that one. Their relationship hadn't rushed. After the storm, they'd chosen stillness. Dinners that lingered into starlit hours. Shared books. Honest silences. A rebuilding slow and true. He never pushed. She never doubted. And trust, once broken, had quietly bloomed again. "I want to show you something," Adrian said one morning, taking her hand. "If you can spare an hour." Minutes later, a private helicopter rose into the clear mountain air, with Adrian himself at the controls. They flew over wildflower meadows, pine-laced ridges, until they reached a glistening alpine lake. There, nestled against the trees, stood a simple wooden cabin, unfinished, modest, beautiful. "What is this place?" Elise asked, stepping into the clearing, the wind catching strands of her hair. Adrian looked at her, not like a CEO, not like a man who once ruled an empire of silence, but like someone who had finally found peace. "It's a beginning," he said, "for both of us." And somewhere between memory and morning light, two people who had lost everything built something that might just last forever. "Nolan built it," Adrian said softly, voice tinged with memory. "This was our secret place, far from my father's reach. It's where Aurora was born, on the back of a napkin, over whiskey and too many wild ideas." The cabin was simple wood and window quiet and light, but it held a kind of sacredness preserved by time and reverence. One wall was covered in photographs. Nolan and Adrian, younger then, laughing, hiking, dreaming. "Before everything broke, I've never brought anyone here," Adrian admitted. Not even after he died. Elise reached for his hand, gentle. Thank you for bringing me. They sat on the porch overlooking the lake, golden sun stretching across the water like a promise. Adrian broke the silence first. When I hired you, he said, I believed rules were the only way to survive. They kept chaos out, kept me safe. He turned to her. But you showed me something else. Not all rules are bad, she replied, a smile playing on her lips. You just built walls and called them structure. Adrian chuckled. Exactly! He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small wooden box, hand-carved, worn at the edges. Nolan made this, told me one day I'd know what to put inside. With steady hands, he opened it. Inside, nestled in velvet, a platinum ring, its emerald center flanked by diamonds. Elise's breath caught. Then Adrian dropped to one knee, mountain light in his eyes. Elise Quinn, he said, voice unsteady but full of heart. I spent most of my life writing rules to keep people away. Now, I'm asking you to help me build just one that keeps us together. He held up the ring. Will you marry me? Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded through them, laughing softly. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. As he slid the ring onto her finger, she tilted her head. What's the rule? Adrian pulled her into his arms, smiling. Love without reservation. Trust without condition. Fight for what matters together. That's 3, she teased. I've never been very good at following rules, he murmured just before kissing her. 3 months later, spring crowned the mountains once again, and in the very place Aurora had been imagined, Adrian and Elise were married. The wedding was small, just those who mattered most. Thomas Quinn, now fully exonerated and leading the ethics committee of the renamed Nathaniel Vale Institute, walked his daughter down the aisle. Dr. Sophia Lynn and the original Aurora team stood as witnesses, faces full of pride and peace, when beside the lake that once knew only silence, 2 people who had fought for truth vowed to build a life out of it. Later that evening, as lanterns glowed and laughter echoed behind them, Adrian led Elise away from the celebration. They stood together, watching the sun melt behind the mountains. Something came today, he said, handing her a sealed envelope. Inside official confirmation, the Nathaniel Vale Foundation was now real. A scholarship for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, young minds who might one day change the world. First class starts next fall, Adrian said. 20 students, 20 chances to keep Nolan's vision alive. Elise leaned into him, smiling. He'd be proud of you. Adrian shook his head gently, his hand settling over her stomach. Of us, he said, we're just beginning to grow was the next chapter of their story. A child, a boy. They would name him Nathan Thomas Vale, and as stars stitched themselves into the sky above the mountains, the future was no longer something they feared. It was something they could hold together, or perhaps the beginning of everything they were meant to become. Adrian Vale stood in silence, the soft breeze of the mountains brushing against his face, carrying with no h-e-gang c-c, ho-o-d-i, the key c. He looked out across the institute grounds, glass and green innovation and heart. Once he had been a man governed by rules, rigid, isolated, unyielding, but then a woman had walked into his world, spilling coffee and breaking barriers, and everything changed. Love had unraveled his armor, truth had demanded his courage, and vulnerability had finally made him free. His father had been wrong. The Vale name hadn't died. It had evolved, no longer a symbol of control or silence. Now it stood for something far more powerful: healing, second chances, and rules rewritten by love. What are you thinking? Elise asked, her voice gentle. Adrian turned, smiling, as he pulled her into his arms. That sometimes, he said, breaking every rule is the only way to find what truly matters. In these mountains, where 2 brothers once dreamed of a better world, a new legacy had taken root. Not one of fear or control, but of connection, of honesty, of love that asked nothing but truth in return. 5 years later, the mountains were still here, but they echoed with laughter and life. Adrian and Elise stood on the newly built observation platform of the Nathaniel Vale Institute's expanded campus. Below, the annual Aurora Summit was in full motion. Doctors, scientists, and students from every continent shared research openly without barriers. Ideas were traded like seeds in the wind. A vision that once felt impossible during Lawrence Vail's reign, now thriving. Daddy, look, 4-year-old Nathan stood at Adrian's side, tugging at his pant leg. A helicopter touched down on the platform below. "That's Dr. Abernathy," Adrian said, lifting his son up. "She's bringing Aurora to remote villages in South Africa." Nathan's steel-gray eyes sparkled, but his laughter was pure. Elise, beside them, she gently adjusted the blanket wrapped around little Eliza, their 3-month-old daughter, peacefully sleeping in her arms. "Your uncle would have loved this," Elise whispered to Nathan. "All these minds, all this hope." Adrian nodded, throat tight. He would have, and this time, he didn't hold the emotion back. The Westwood name had long since been retired. In its place, the Nathan Vale Foundation stood tall, an institution built not on power, but purpose. Adrian had taken his inheritance and turned it into light. Thomas Quinn now led the ethics division, ensuring every choice was made with compassion, and Sophia Lynn, calm and commanding, had become the Institute's director of research. She approached with a warm smile. 10 minutes to go," she reminded gently. "You ready for your big moment, Nathan?" The boy nodded solemnly. Today he would help unveil a statue of the uncle he'd never met, but whose spirit shaped the very ground he walked on. As they made their way down to the courtyard, Adrian's thoughts drifted back to the coffee, to the confrontation, to the rules he once believed could protect him. His father's empire had been built on silence, but the institute they now led was built on transparency, collaboration, and the freedom to ask why not. Principles Elise had lived by, and had quietly, brilliantly taught him to follow. And as the sun rose again over the Vermont sky, Adrian Vale knew he hadn't lost his legacy. He had finally found it. Or rather, the beginning of a legacy that finally chose love. In the courtyard beneath the open sky, young Nathan Vale stepped forward. With hands still small but heart already strong, he reached for the cord beside him and pulled. The statue beneath the cloth was revealed, a likeness of a man whose dream had changed the world, not with power, but with purpose. Nolan Vale. Applause rippled through the crowd. Scientists, doctors, dreamers, people from every corner of the world who had gathered not to celebrate wealth, but to honor healing. Adrian stepped up to the podium, Elise beside him. He stood tall, calm, free. "My brother believed healing should never be a privilege," he began. "He believed the true measure of scientific progress isn't how much it earns, but how many lives it touches." He paused. Let the silence settle around him like a blessing. "Today," he continued, "I look at this institute, at all of you, and I know the Reed legacy didn't end with my father. It evolved. It became something stronger than control, wiser than ambition, brighter than fear. It became this, a place without walls, a mission without borders, a future without secrets." "Welcome, Adrian," said gently, "to a world without barriers." He turned slightly, his hand finding Elise's, and to a story rewritten. Not by rules, but by love. And somewhere in that moment, between truth and tenderness, between grief and growth, every heart, listening, felt something settle, something quiet, something kind, that perhaps no matter how a story begins, it can always end in light, because love, truth, and courage don't just change the world, they heal it. Or simply the beginning of hope. To each and every one of you who joined us on this journey, thank you. Thank you for listening with open hearts, for holding space, for the quiet moments, and for believing in stories that heal rather than hurt. This wasn't just a story about science secrets or redemption. It was a story about us all, about the human capacity to change, to forgive, and to begin again. If even one part of this story touched your heart, made you feel less alone, or reminded you of your own strength, then it has done what it came here to do. From all of us at Shining Stories, we're deeply grateful for your time, your presence, and your belief in the power of storytelling. Here's to rewriting the rules together, with love, with courage, and always with light. Until the next story finds you, thank you for being here.